Recording. Welcome, everyone. This is Noreen Nikolic. Am I pronouncing your last name right?
It's Nikolic.
Nikolic. I realize I've never said it out loud, so I've only been saying it in my head. Nikolic. And she's joining us from Manila. I just want to give you the full screen hello before I switch to my slides and give everyone a moment to join. So now I'm going to switch to my slides, our slides, and play it from the start. And here we are. This is Trauma-Informed Ashtanga, lessons from Noreen in Manila. I'm super excited about this, like so fired up. I've been excited about it all day. It's August 31st here in California, but it's actually the future in the Philippines right now. It's September 1st, Tuesday. And we are recording. I'm just gonna double check. Yes, we are recording. So I'll start just by introducing you all to Noreen, who is just an amazing person. Some of you might not know me. Actually, I should back up and do that. I pronounce my last name Danilchuk. I'm Lisa, last name Danilchuk. There's a glamour shot of me. You can kind of see my mom's shoulder that got cut off in the bottom right-hand corner there. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in California. I'm also an experienced registered yoga teacher. I'm also an author of 3 books. I'm going to give at least one of them away at the end of the call. I did that on my last webinar. It was really fun, so keep it going. I also founded the Center for Yoga and Trauma Recovery and the Y4T online training program, which Noreen is a graduate of the online training program and the advanced training program just recently, and she has some amazing things to share with you. Here's another photo of Noreen, who you can see on the screen. Nikolic. Yeah? Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
And
yes.
Your married name, Bellarmino?
Yes, it's Bellarmino.
Bellarmino. Okay, that one like sounds more Italian, so it's easier. Noreen is a yoga teacher in Manila. She's the founder of the Surya Project, working with women who've experienced sex trafficking. And she's a co-director of the AD 108 Yoga School. And that's in Manila, right? In or around?
Yes, we are based in Manila. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to share about yourself, Noreen? She's a big gardener, big into gardening.
Yes, yeah, I'm very passionate now about gardening. Maybe one of my dreams is 5 years from now, maybe I can live in a farm and maybe a more sustainable type of living and not going to the grocery. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, I also am a vegan, yeah, and quite an advocate for it. So yeah, a lot of things, yeah.
You're an activist in many ways and a lover of the planet. Before you all joined,
Yes.
we were just talking about Mother Earth and our prayers for her at the end of our yoga practices.
True.
So, like I said, we're connecting sort of across time and space. Noreen over there in the Philippines, and I know most of you, well, some of you are in the US, some of you in Canada, and tons of you from other places in the world. So I'm super excited to have you here. We've got a short time together, about a half an hour. So I'd really encourage you to kind of focus in and minimize whatever distractions might be there. We will potentially go a little bit over. Both Noreen and I are very passionate about this topic. So we're going to pack as much as we can into 30 minutes, but we might just go a few minutes over. Those of you who need to go, don't worry, we're recording this and we'll send the recording out after. So our goals today is to be a little more casual and have a conversation. I always create PowerPoint slides to kind of plan and keep us on topic and generate ideas and get things ready for you. But we're really just wanting to share some of Noreen's wisdom and experience with you. So we'll talk a little bit about changes in the Ashtanga community and what Noreen's noticed in her area. We'll also talk about which trauma-informed yoga practices Noreen's seen help the most in the folks she's working with, and share a few lessons from working with survivors of sex trafficking. And this is something that both Noreen and I have done in very different contexts. So I'm excited to share some of that with some of you who I know are also working with domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, and sex trafficking. Since we're obviously talking about some pretty heavy topics, we've already mentioned some things that are pretty intense. I always encourage you to resource yourself first, right? So I often share, I've got a nice cold beverage here because it's relatively hot in California. I like to just have the opportunity to put my feet on the floor, my hands on the desk, ground. I use nature a lot too to resource and look out the window at the trees. And the other day there were 4 birds on the tree right outside my window. I had to actually like stop and say, there are 4 birds on that tree, and share it with the person who didn't see it. But point being, resource yourself first. So please care for yourself, get comfortable, use this time as a practice like you would a yoga session. Support yourself, make choices that work for you. Ground when you need to, focus in, give yourself that challenge. And the kind of guiding question I recommend is to always come back to, what do I need right now? Right? So especially if you're starting to feel a little overwhelmed or out of sorts, okay, you take a breath or ground, do something that serves, and then ask, what do I need right now? Okay. So with that, I'd like to start to share some of Noreen's experiences with you. So my question for you, Noreen, is what changes would you like to see in the yoga and Ashtanga communities in particular to make this practice of yoga, of Ashtanga yoga, more trauma informed?
I mean, you already know in terms of my position in many things, and I do believe that education is very essential. It's very important to make changes, and changes is always like, I always see changes as always will work for the best. And I was talking to you about this a while ago, right? At this very point in our lifetime, I think it is no longer an excuse not to be informed. That's because all the information is out there. It is our responsibility, and we owe it to ourselves to be informed and to educate ourselves with information that matters. Of course, we have to be very, and that's, I think, one of the main teaching of yoga is to be critical about the information that we are actually taking in, to be more like, we have to decide, we have to choose what we put into our minds, into ourselves. So I think we can all agree to that. So to be more trauma informed, then the first one for me is to educate ourselves. As yoga practitioners and as yoga teachers, we have to learn about trauma informed principles, to understand the nature of trauma, a deeper understanding of what is trauma. Because most of the time we don't know the background of the people who comes to our classes. I have so many I have encountered a few students who, after the class, they will say, like, like they have difficulty breathing during this pose, but during that time I'm not really aware of what trauma is. And little that I know, that was like, I was just telling, maybe it's the posture, or maybe the way you actually do the Urdhva Dhanurasana or something like that, not knowing that, oh, maybe she was actually being triggered during the actual class. And it is my responsibility as a teacher to make the practice more helpful for my students, because most of the time, and we know that as yoga practitioners, that we go to yoga class because we are somehow looking for a form of healing in whatever way we need it. So when we go to a class, we wanted to be to have that feeling of safety, and we want to feel good after the class, and not to be like really feeling of panic or anxious right after the class. So I think as yoga teachers, we have to be responsible with that, because it is, I believe, our responsibility not to further harm our students, but to actually help in the healing. Mm-hmm. And I will go further into advocating that trauma-informed yoga, or trauma-informed principles should be really incorporated in the standards of the foundational trainings of all yoga teachers, because I believe it is our responsibility. And another one, apart from educating ourselves or education, I also believe that having this knowledge of trauma informed will definitely create a change of perspective, and that's what we wanted in terms of changes, is to really change it from paradigm. Like there's a paradigm shift, like both in the perspective, and once we change how we look at things, then that will resonate, or that will trickle down into how we apply, or how we do our classes, or even how we treat other people, and most especially how we treat ourselves. So that's one of the main advocacy that I am really passionate about, is to educate ourselves about trauma informed principles, and that will actually change how we do our classes, or how we even practice our yoga.
And the
And
culture
then,
even, right? Like,
yes,
I just want
exactly.
to zoom out for a second and say, some folks might be joining who maybe they're not in the Ashtanga world, or maybe they haven't heard some of the things that have happened, but I would say across lineages, every lineage of yoga has had some form of abuse come to light, and the Ashtanga lineage is no exception. I mean, there's interviews and books about it, and people have shared their personal stories, and it's created, I would say, an opportunity for growth in that community for
Yes,
sure. And I think what you're speaking to is, right, the first point is discernment, which is something we study and practice, right? Let's educate,
exactly.
be critical, let's discern. And then ahimsa, let's try to be nonviolent, let's try to be caring even, and do no harm. And then,
Exactly.
when we were talking before we started, there's that sense of the saying, like, knowledge is power. And I think of, like,
Yeah.
knowledge is empowerment too, and discernment and choice are empowerment too. So the more, as students, as teachers, we can do what you're saying and educate ourselves about trauma and healthy systems, the more we can actually create that paradigm shift within the Ashtanga community, within yoga as a whole. It's in a pretty, I don't know, precarious place, but it's in a transition.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add to that, I think it is when, I mean, I just want to link it into understanding trauma. Um, then we can go beyond, that stigma on trauma itself,
Mm-hmm.
saying that, oh, that is not me, or that doesn't happen to me, and there's a lot of layers of trauma. It doesn't have to be extreme as, repeatedly being sexually abused when you were young until your adult life. It's that's not it. It's like it can be a one-time recurrence, and it can happen to you, and it can happen to anyone, like even in your students. So it's very important for us to actually know all of this information, because again, I'll go back, it is a responsibility as yoga teachers, it is a responsibility as an individual, as part of our empowerment, is to really know. And in yoga, we always talk about knowing ourselves. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong, like I'm not saying that we are our abuse, or we are, what all of the abuses that happen to us. But the thing is, like, we have to heal ourselves first, to go through, you know we have to know that too, for us to go deeper into ourselves. So I think, again, education, I'll always go back to education. Informing ourselves is very important.
Yeah, and
And
that
then,
leads to what we're already talking about, right? The culture.
yes, true. And then the next one that I also think that will be very important change, in terms of making the practice. I'm not just talking now maybe in terms of Ashtanga practice, but like you said, it's like in general, like a yoga practice in whatever lineages or whatever style, is that we need to rethink the rigid top-down strategy in the teaching practice. I'm not saying that, this strategy is completely wrong, because I think I still believe that structure, in a way, is very helpful in developing that discipline. But when I said that we have to rethink this rigid top-down strategy, it becomes very, uh, like, there's really a power dynamics that's happening between the practitioner and the teachers, or the guru, if they want to call it a guru. And this power dynamics is becoming really a source of abuse, I would say. And also, in addition to that, having a knowledgeable and experienced and well-grounded, respectable teacher is an important as ever. There's a lot of qualifier there for me. It's like in terms of a teacher. That's why I said like it's really a big responsibility to become a yoga teacher. There's a lot of responsibility there. And one is we have to really be knowledgeable, and I'll go back again to educating ourselves with what is necessary for a yoga teacher to know, and we have to do our practice, because it's not the knowledge is that's what is yoga is all about. It's experiential philosophy, it's experiential wisdom. So we have to do our practice, but we have to be grounded as well, and we have to practice it with with respect to ourselves and respect to others, and everything will follow, and in terms of how we do our practice, because the current system, like I've said, create this power dynamics or unequal power dynamics. It's between yoga, I believe, should be power with, power within and power with the community. But it shouldn't be power over. And that's, I mean, and one thing that I really appreciate in the trauma-informed principles, or when I'm studying about this trauma-informed, is really the inclusion of the discussion about injustices, about inequality. And I think that's one of the very important information that all of us, not just yoga teachers, but everyone should actually understand, should actually know, because a lot of violence, a lot of abuses that we as individuals and as a collective people experience is because of this power over, this inequality among people, among colors, among gender, among species. So that I think is very important information or wisdom that we all have to know. And when I say about power over, or this unequal power dynamics, it's not just between teachers and student, but once it happened in that category, in that area, then it actually extends in the whole community itself, and not just in a yoga community, but also in your family, in the whole, in general community as well, in the society. So
Yeah.
and this is what I really advocate, or I recommend, is to foster a person or survivor-centered approach to the practice, where uh, lived experiences, or the actual experiences of each individual practitioners should be recognized, and individual choices are encouraged and respected. Because I think when we talk about the practice now, it's I don't know, like I and I can be guilty of that as well. It's like when, and it become very clear to me when I really incorporated trauma inform in in how I do my classes and how I give my classes, and even how I practice, is the choices. I think it's very important, not just for those who experience abuse, but I think in our situation in this current times, people really we are not, or our agency as individuals are not so much um, it's respected, if I may say. It's not highlighted.
Yeah.
And one of that is really to make our choices. But when we talk about choices, it should be informed choices. It should be choices that's really coming from a real option. And it's not just like, okay, it's like choosing between two evils always kind of situation. And it's not a choice for me. Choices should be something that will make me a better human being, or I can make human live their lives into like full lives, and more comfortable lives.
And more healing, right? It's like
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
healing choice that's often like, sometimes it can feel hard to find, but like somewhere in there when we're struggling, there's a healing choice. And I think when you talk about responsibility, and the responsibility of the teacher or the service of the teacher is to try to help people find that, right? Not to enforce something in a top-down, really rigid way.
Yeah, and like you said, it should be healing. And I want to add is like it should really be empowering, and that's when choice and developing or cultivating agency is very, very important, and that should be really incorporated in the yoga practice. Because when we talk about yoga practice, we always go back to its essence, is knowing the self, and knowing the self or connecting to the self is the height of empowerment for me. Is like that's it, that's all about it. I'm not talking about egocentric empowerment here. I'm talking about really going in and being, the light that we be, the light being that we should be, and all of that.
There's so much
So
in what you're saying. It's so rich. It makes it like puts off all these different thoughts in my head that I know we probably don't have time for, but yeah.
And yeah, so I'll go back. Like I said, there should be really a recognition and respect on the actual experiences of each individual practitioners. There should be a recognition on and respect on individual choices. And this will facilitate more equal communication as well between the teachers and students and between the community. And this is what, like I really dream of, is there's more collective healing and more collective empowerment. uh, I just want to connect that into my perspective of, again, yoga. When I was like really starting on going deep into studying the yoga philosophy, there's this question in my mind: is yoga very individualistic? It's like and maybe someone who have a background on, like working really with non-governmental organizations, that everything, like all the efforts is really for the collective, as like for the betterment of all. I have this resistance of accepting that yoga is just an individualistic practice that make an individual achieve their own samadhi. Like I believe there's more to that. There's more to that. And then the way, like the more I practice, the more I go deep with my practice and studying, swadhyaya, I really feel, more than maybe I can express in words, but I really feel that yoga is more than anything else a collective practice, where we heal each other, where we empower each other. Of course, we start with ourselves, and everything we have to start with ourselves. But at the end of it all, we as a community should share this feeling, or yeah, the feeling of empowerment, this feeling of oneness. And then it's really real on me, in my heart, that what is yoga is all about for me. It's not just an individual, it's not just my individual salvation, but it is really a collective practice for our own, for everyone's enlightenment, or
So there's two things I want to say quickly, and then we can go to the next slide. But when you talk about that, I think of union. And for those of you who are on the last webinar, I offered for yoga teachers reciprocal transformation. I shared, right, that growth in me and the growth in you, and how it's generative for everyone. And the other thing I want to say about this is that survivor-centered, that person-centered approach, I think of it in the larger sense, and particularly in the Ashtanga community, it's the difference between, when someone gives you an apology and they say, "I'm sorry if you felt that way." It's not really an apology, right? It's like, wait, but that's so invalidating. Like, I'm hurt. Oh, I'm sorry if you feel that way. Well,
it's like, it's my fault that I feel this way.
And I'm not even, like, I don't even know that apology has come across to people who've felt harmed in the Ashtanga tradition, but it's the difference between something like that and how did that feel for you? Like, the survivor-centered approach is, wow, maybe I had a different experience, but let me understand, how did that feel for you, right? And what fostered that, and how can we make sure people don't feel the way that you felt in this situation, right? And the things that happen to you don't happen to other people, that kind of preventative stance. So I feel like there's so much richness in what you're sharing, and I want to see if you can share with folks, like, when you're working with people and you're coming from this more collective focus and the power with focus and offering education, which aspects of yoga do you see helping people who are coping with trauma? So what's helping your people the most? This is just a picture of my feet in the water, because that's what helps me the most. That's what helps me the most.
Yeah, I like, it's not just for the people that I help or work with, or my students who's like coming to my yoga classes, but for me as an individual, an individual practitioner who also went through experiences of trauma, of abuse, and all of that, I think when I started doing yoga, it's really that aspect of mindfulness, of that aspect of awareness, coupled with and integrated with the body movements, integrated with the breath, integrated with everything that kind of do in a very mundane way. Like that really helped me to ground myself, to center myself, and and that's when it becomes a very powerful practice for me. And in my experience, if that's my experience, and talking with the survivors and after classes and all of that, I think it's relatively the same experience, of course, to various degrees, but it's very much the same effect to them. Like I have one experience when I was like very new on teaching the trauma informed to the survivors, or yoga in general to the survivors. One survivor came to me and then said like, oh, mamian. It's like she was so happy after it. It's like, and she said like, you know what, like when we were doing the samastiti, like we were going through, like lifting the toes and all of that, like really grounding your feet on the ground, and those instructions. And she said like, I never felt that I have ever, like my body was straight, that in my whole life. Like she never felt that, and it feels so good. Like she feels that she always kind of rounding her back, like she's, it's like that. And that tendency of really making the body small
Yeah.
is very telling in terms of the experiences of this particular survivor. And after that, like every time that like we see each other or even talk, it's like, oh, my back is not hurting that much. Like she always now go back to her body, and even telling her daughter to stand straight and giving all those instructions. And that, I mean, it's, if you will look at it and just listen to it without understanding this, it's just very simple. It's like, just straighten the spine. But in terms of how it really affects the survivors or individuals who have gone through a lot, that means a lot. Like that grounding, that centering, that feeling the body for the very first time is very, very deep experience for her and for me as well, who went through that process with her as well. So it's very important. And of course, safety. I think that's one of the very important principle of trauma informed, which we haven't really uh, discussed in many, teacher trainings, like as a foundation. I think that we talk about safety, of course, in not injuring the physical body, like not injuring ourselves during the asana practice. But there's more to that, and I think we have to really talk about that. And then
around that right now too, there's a lot of learning around how some postures really aren't great for most bodies, or how we can exploit our joints to our detriment, right? So there's that basic physiological safety, there's a learning curve happening, but the emotional safety is, rarely addressed.
yeah, and like I said, like people come to yoga classes. I mean, of course, there's a big population of people who go to yoga classes, to, for physical reasons. Yeah. But a big percentage of practitioners as well who go to yoga classes is because they're looking for some sort of healing. Therefore, we really have to also give focus on the emotional safety in terms of talking about it, learning about it.
Yeah.
And then another one is, of course, incorporating. This for me is very, I always highlight this in most of my classes. It's really talk about the yamas and niyamas. Of course, as a beginner, like you will not talk about the whole philosophy of yoga, yeah, but how you creatively incorporate yamas and niyamas, or the principles of yamas and niyamas in your classes, are also very, very important, because this, I believe, really provide another layer of resource in terms of coping with the effects of trauma. And not just an effect of trauma, for me, it's really it can be really a resource on how we deal with daily life, because that's what makes the practice very, very practical, or the philosophy of yoga very, very practical.
Absolutely. So last question, what have you learned in your work with survivors of sex trafficking?
Oh, a lot.
I
think I mean, I started working with survivor, or I mean, with the organization. The name of the organization is Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, Asia Pacific. It deals primarily with issue of sex trafficking and prostitution, but of course, women's issues are just connected with each other. So, I mean, most of those who were trafficked are also victims of domestic violence, who were also victims of survivors of rape, incest rape, particularly when they were young. So everything is kind of, and part of that also on the issue of trafficking and prostitution is that it's not just one survivor. It's like, if they have their kids, we call it like the second generation or third generation victims of, because they were very vulnerable to be trafficked as well. So it's quite complicated. And I started to be exposed in this type of service or type of work when I was 20, like really like right after my uni. Then I went to work with the organization, and I just remember the first work that I did was a researcher, and my task was to interview at least 50 survivors of
Wow.
of trafficking. And and it's really like a 2-hour interview with a very thick interview questions. And right after interview, like I can't move, like I can't, I cannot even describe. I still feel it in my body right now. I can still feel my, like how I feel every after the interview. And I think I was told, I mean, I thought then that, like I cannot cry. Like I'm not supposed to cry whenever like I'm doing the interview, because no one told me that, but I thought like that's unprofessional. But I can't. I really have to excuse myself and go to the bathroom, and then I really have to cry, because if not, it's like I'll just faint or whatever. Yeah. So
Yeah.
And that was my first exposure. It's hard. Like I mean, it's traumatic for me. That I mean, the organization have to, like after end of the day, like my boss will always have to sit with me and do debriefing and all, and but that really changed my life. That really changed how I view things, how I decided what I wanted to do with everything that I do, and I'm very thankful of that. I think not everyone have that privilege actually to have that experience early on in their lives. So even if I focus in yoga at some aspect in my life, I still connect with them, maybe not as a full time, because at one point in my life, like I have to decide for myself, like what's good for me. So, but now I'm still working with them as a board member of the coalition. And I work directly with the survivors as well, and giving, trauma informed classes with them, and many other, activities with them. Uh, so yes, vicarious trauma is really true, and that maybe have resulted for me at some point in working in that organization, or in working in that particular issue, that it becomes mechanical for me, and there's really a burnout. That's when I really have to decide what is good for me, and there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of shame that happened to me when I left the actual work. But that's maybe one thing that I have to heal with myself then, well, until now, I guess. But that really changed my worldview. And to answer directly your question, what I learned in terms of, working with the survivors, with the victims, and one is, and that's why I really put up the Surya Project, because that's me. I describe it, me bringing everything into full circle. Like what I'm now, like doing practicing yoga, and an educator of yoga, but at the same time, like my experiences of working with survivors of violence against women in general, like putting it together into a certain project or a certain action, that hopefully in my own little way I can do something for healing and empowerment of the people that I really care for, or the population that I really advocate for. So yeah, again, going back to the actual question, what are the lessons learned? For me, is yoga needs to be very simple and accessible to everyone. When I say simple and accessible, is it's basically, let's not complicate things. And sometimes we have the tendency in the yoga world to complicate everything. We overthink it. But when we go to the communities, when we go to the grassroots, like when I go to have a class, I'm not like, basically just feel your feet, feel your body, feel your spine against the chair, and all of that, and that practice, or that very, very simple practice, is very accessible for them. And because it's accessible to them, it gives that effect of what we wanted, the effect of grounding, the effect of centering, the effect of feeling safe. And hopefully that we are planting that seed of healing, of resource that they can use regardless if we're there or not, that they can use in the daily basis whenever they need it. And simple breathing, counting, or just counting the breath, just teach those techniques, can really help someone who are already in the verge of panic attack, of of dissociations. Like, maybe this can bring me back, this can actually ground me, and stay in the present moment, is very important as well.
I have two thoughts.
Sorry.
I just want to have two thoughts I want to share. You say simple awareness, like sensation in the feet, and samasthiti, and it makes me think, like, I've known so many people who've said the simplest practice has been so profound for them, like coming back to their feet, or coming back to center, or a hand on heart, something like that. Whatever works for each person, it's different. But like you said, that simple awareness can be really powerful. I can't think of a single person I've ever worked with that's like, oh my God, that moment I got into Ekapada Kundinyasana, all my trauma resolved. Like, it's just, there's like this delusion, I feel like, in the yoga world, that that's where it is. Like, once you contort or you achieve some external form, then things, and people still ask, like, what's the posture? What's the sequence? Like, I get that question to this day. What sequence is the best for trauma recovery? And answer, of course, is it depends. Like, what's the trauma? What are the symptoms? What are people going through? What's their mobility like? All kinds of things matter in response to that. And the other thing I wanted to say is, don't know if anyone else has read this. Recently I read that when people are having a panic attack, they start to try to breathe faster because they feel like they can't breathe or they don't have oxygen. But in reality, they don't have, they have too much oxygen, right? They need more carbon dioxide, which is why, like the bag, people breathe into a bag. I never fully understood that, but which is why the breathing into the bag or the counting your breath and slowing your breath actually helps, because it helps balance out the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it's just an interesting, like a different approach, and another potential explanation for why that slow breathing can actually help someone who's about to really spin out in an uncomfortable way.
Mm-hmm.
Was there something else you wanted to say about the slide?
Sorry, Lisa, you kind of dropped. I did not.
Oh, that's okay. I was just asking if was there something else you were going to say along the lines here on this slide, or are you complete?
No, I'm good. Like again, I always just go back, make it simple and make it accessible. I think that's when it becomes effective. You know, like we as yoga teachers, I think we know, or as human, like we know what can be healing. I feel that, but sometimes it is the tendency to overthink it. It should be, you know, very very not complicated, but there should be more than just standing. There should be more than inhale, exhale for it to be healing. It for in my experience as a survivor who went through, you know, this practice, that it becomes very healing for me, and someone who's sharing this is like the most simple way on how you bring this across, then that's when it becomes more effective, because it's 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 the continuity as well of the practice. It's once you give a very complicated, when you transfer a very complicated practice to someone, then they have the tendency to just, oh, I need the teacher, or I need her to be with me for me to practice it. Then what, you will just see each other every other week, or I'm lucky if you will see each other once a week. Then there's nothing, like nothing will happen if that will be the case. But if you will just tell them to just, you know, feel the texture of the floor with your feet, and just breathe, you know, inhale 1 to 4, exhale 1 to 4, and just do that whenever you feel that you need it, then it becomes more effective. So that's when I say simple and accessible yeah, that's what I also meant by simple and accessible.
Yeah.
And then this, I really want, lastly, I really want to emphasize this, that yoga practice should be grounded. This should be grounded in and not disconnected from the experiences, our mundane experiences. Like, don't get me wrong, like I like in terms of, you know, the main essence of yoga, I'm not going away from it. Like I truly believe that there's some, like, we go beyond this physical, you know, we go beyond survival. But at the same time, I believe that even before we talk about that, we have to manage this first. And I've seen that with survivors, I've seen that with myself, that before I can even sit and close my eyes, I have to work with that feeling of, when I close my eyes, like I see my past, or I see the experiences of abuse.
Yeah.
Then I have to work in that moment that I cannot still close my eyes, or I cannot still do this other, you know, practices that really brings me within or inside, because we have to work with our layers, and not everyone are on the same layer. So I guess that's why in yoga, there's a lot of paths of yoga. There, and because it, even before thousands of years ago, there's already a recognition that not one style is for everyone. Yeah. So I guess I'll go back. One of the principles of trauma informed yoga that I really appreciate is that recognition of respecting and understanding where we are at the present moment, and work with that towards your healing.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Noreen. We have one question, or more of a statement too. Martin says, as a trauma psychologist, I have yet to see an effective safety negotiation as it applies to group classes. I wonder if there needs to be a fundamental reframe of what the underlying purpose of yoga practice is for these contexts. Yes, and I think that's exactly what we're saying with the examples of, you know, keeping it simple versus focusing on, you know, your peak posture or progressing through the series or achieving enlightenment or whatever. If there's a lofty goal,
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I think healing is, and the process of healing and taking it one moment, like really being present and taking it one moment at a time. It's like, oh, this is what's coming up now, and this is what's coming up now, right? It might not be as like flashy, right? But that's the stuff that I think people, the reason people say yoga was really helpful for them lies more in those types of practices, right? And so, yeah, I do think it's a reframe, and that's really what we're advocating for here. So I'll just review, we talked about a lot of different things: trauma-informed education, power imbalance and power balance, being aware of really simple tools and using them skillfully, tracking your own vicarious trauma, right? If you're needing to cry, if you're having dreams, like those are, having especially nightmares or bad dreams, those are symptoms, like please take care of yourself. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And then to ground the practice in the physical and connect it to each other as a whole and the planet and the spiritual. All of these things are really powerful, right? So I want to wrap up and thank you all for just coming and being interested in this. There's a lot more we could say, and we probably will just continue to over time. I'd encourage you to keep in touch with Noreen. You can find her at ashtanga-vinyasa108.com as her yoga school. And you can find me, many of you are already there, at howwecanheal.com. There's lots of great resources, including mental health resources and COVID resources up there on the website. So if you haven't already, please go check that out. Coming up soon, we'll send you the recording in case you miss any part of this. There's also a Y4T info session happening this Wednesday, September 2nd at 12 noon Pacific. So if you're curious about the program, I'll walk through each week of it, give you the lowdown there. I know some of you on here have already done it. And then the next training starts September 7th. So there's still a chance to apply. You can go to howwecanheal.com/Y4T to apply. And you know, I always give you guys a little love at the end. So what do you think, Noreen? Should we let's give away a copy of Embodied Healing. But for those of you who stuck around, please, I'm just gonna go first person to put your name in the Q&A box. So it's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. Julia Carpenter, congratulations. I will sign it. So the other thing is the Q&A box is private. So please put your full address, and I'm gonna like sign it and give it a little kiss and then spray it with lavender alcohol, and then I'll send it off to you. So put your full shipping address in the chat. You can also email it to lisa@howwecanheal.com. I'll also give out a copy of Yoga for Trauma. Actually, wait, I'll give one, How We Can Heal. This is a PDF copy that you can download. So Karen Cruz, put your email in the chat and I will send you a copy of How You Can Heal. And one more, who wants this one? Yoga for Trauma Recovery, Theory, Philosophy, and Practice. My finest work, if I do say so myself. It's the most recent book. Put your name in the chat. We've got Heather. Heather, didn't you win one last time? I think you got How You Can Heal, am I right? So Heather, if you don't already have Yoga for Trauma Recovery, or if you want to give it to a friend, please put your address in. Yeah. Oh, congratulations, Heather. All right, she hasn't won yet. I don't know why your name. Oh, I know why your name looks familiar. All right, so I'll send you a copy of this. If you already have one, you can share it with a friend. And I like your last name because it ends in CHUK. So make sure to put your address. I see a whole bunch of you also put your emails in here. I will send you a little email love, so everyone's a winner because you know how I feel about that. And thank you guys. Just thanks for being here and participating and listening to Noreen. She's a powerful voice for change, and she's one of those people who says, I'm the only one doing this in Manila. And I'm like, not for long, because you're in the leadership position now. And she's going full force. So keep your eyes on her. And please just continue to care for each other. I always pick a snuggle picture of animals. There's a little pig and a goat, right? Oh, so cute. So please keep taking care of yourselves and your animals and each other. I know these are hard times. Whew, wow. So if you can come back to care, I highly encourage you to do that. So great to have all of you here. Any final things you want to say, Noreen, before we say goodbye?
Just thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you so much. And I keep on telling this to you. Thank you for the program. It really kind of changed as well. Thank you for your mentorship on how I put together things on the things in relation to yoga that I wanted to do. And yeah, you already know that how this program really affected or inspired what I'm doing here now, what I've started. And again,
I love what you've started. What you've started inspires me, which is such a beautiful full circle moment. I love it.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, like I always say, is like I am so used of working in the background. Like I'm not, like I am effective in there, but right now I think it needs to be out there. It can be quite scary, just like this interview. when you invited me, I was like, oh, I'm so excited, but scared at the same time. Yeah,
Oh, you did awesome.
not so used of all of this interviews and all. But now I think like this voice or this information is very important to be out there, and I take it as a responsibility to put it out there. It's a learning process. I'm not saying it's, I mean, especially if like we put in the titles, like really making an Ashtanga trauma informed, I think it's really a very, a very big responsibility, because even in the Ashtanga community, there's a different perspectives there. And then we put trauma informed, then it becomes a different, discussion altogether. So yeah, I mean, I am in the position, I guess. I have the voice, I have the space to do it. Then I have to do, and I will do what I can in terms of at least planting that seed of change in our not just in the yoga community. I think in general for everyone, because I really believe that yoga is for healing and empowerment. And yeah, we have to translate that into action, and this is hopefully what I can do in translating it into action. So thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a very big opportunity for me, and yeah.
It's an honor to have you here, and I'm glad that everyone else got to meet you, and you're doing it, and that's, like I said, that's really inspiring to me. So thank you. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up. Thanks for joining, and keep in touch, and just sending you all lots of love. Bye, everybody. Take care.